BioShock Infinite, the third and final game in the BioShock trilogy of games of which I have now completed for the first time. When I say without hyperbole that this is maybe one of my favorite games of all time after playing it through, I do not mean that lightly. So much so that I will go even as far to say that this is not only my favorite game in the series, but I think that this game is a bona fide masterpiece. No matter which way you put it, this game took me through an experience that I simply did not get to a full 100% like I did with the first two in the series. BioShock 1 and BioShock 2 are fantastic games, and almost masterpieces in their own way as well, but there is something about BioShock Infinite that struck me even more to the point where I cannot stop thinking about it till this day. I can't stop thinking about the story, I can't stop thinking about the gameplay, the characters, and the twists and turns that it takes along the way. I'll even throw in the DLC as a bonus because I played that afterwards after many people suggested that I should, and I cannot be thankful enough for those people who suggested it because the DLC compacts this whole game into something beautiful and inspiring. We are going to talk about it all here now, so if you are somebody who liked or loved BioShock Infinite and the whole series of games, give this video a like and let's see if we can hit a goal of 50 likes on this video. Also, there will be spoilers ahead in this video, so you have been warned just in case you have not played the game. I don't want to waste any time here and I want to jump right in because like with the last two games, many people here know that I have commented heavily on the atmosphere, concept, and setting that is so beautifully detailed throughout each game. BioShock Infinite only heightens that 10 times, even 100 times at certain points. Infinite is set in an alternate dystopian 1912 and takes place in a floating steampunk city state in the sky called Columbia. You play as Booker DeWitt, a man who is sent to the flying city to find a missing girl named Elizabeth to pay off a debt. What ensues from there is nothing but pure awesome fun that I will never forget. Of course, the difference this time around in terms of the atmosphere is that this game takes place in a floating city in the sky versus Rapture City, which took place under the ocean. Columbia was truly everything that I was not expecting and more. I might get called crazy for this, but I love the city of Columbia way more just after one game than I did with my experience in two games in Rapture City. Everything from the vibrant colors, architectural designs of the buildings and its landscapes, to even some of the wacky nature of everything that is inside of it, just like with how we saw in Rapture City. The city itself is just so much more expressive than Rapture in my opinion, and a lot of that might have to do with what it was like to look at it and walk through it. Rapture City is just a war-torn place of misery, loneliness, and despair and bleakness so much of the time that it just didn't connect with me as much when I'm walking around the streets of Columbia, where it feels like I am there with everybody else in a time of peace and happiness. At least so that would seem to be the case until the game ventures off into what it becomes in the later half of its story and gameplay. If I had to give any newcomer to this franchise a reason enough to play this game, it would be because of this game's atmosphere and attention to detail. It knows what it is and it stays true to that throughout each second, minute, and hour, especially when I was playing through it. The characters of this particular game I found to be some of the most compelling and intriguing out of the entire series. Between Booker DeWitt and Elizabeth, I was constantly fascinated with their journey and how they tried to figure out what the city of Columbia was about through their different perspectives and situations. Booker is trying to pay off a debt to get the girl, while the girl herself is somebody who was locked up in this city by its leaders, and they have to find a way to traverse around that while also unraveling the details behind some of the darker secrets that are spread throughout this city's past. On top of that, they also have to deal with a revolution that is about to become a problem for the city of Columbia from a militant group known as the Vox Populi. So there is a lot to juggle here when exploring the characters while also keeping in mind all of the events that surround them. Again, each path of the journey that I went through when these events would take place only added more to the outlook on what those characters were trying to figure out, but also giving me a new clue and a twist with regards to their backgrounds that I did not see coming. I feel like you really do have to be paying attention because I can tell you right now, after a first playthrough, I bet there are a few things that did go over my head, but I was still able to at least get the gist of what this game was going for. One of the biggest components of this game, from a character perspective, is from Elizabeth, who has this power to open up what are called tears. It is basically a power that allows her to open up the fabric of reality where she can view every event across all these different infinite timelines simultaneously, and they act as a doorway for you to travel into them or at least peek through to see. Basically establishing that this game is focusing heavily heavily on the idea of parallel universes, or in this case, a word that has been thrown around a lot recently in entertainment, which is the multiverse. Now, of course, this game came out way before a lot of that stuff with the idea of multiverse came to be in recent years, but I found this game's ability to use a character like this with that kind of power to be so interesting, especially when you get into the nitty-gritty details of the story, which we will talk about soon. Booker DeWitt, who I might add is voiced by the great Troy Baker, is another aspect of the idea of a character in this game where I found myself to be way more interested in who you were than the past two games. With BioShock 1 and BioShock 2, you play as a voiceless character, whether that's Jack from the first, or if it's the subject Delta Big Daddy that you are in BioShock 2. And again, given the fact that they are voiceless in those games, I never really connected with a character, and I can understand that for some people that is interesting and different, but for some reason I'm going along with a character like Booker, and he does have a voice. I was just way more interested in what was going on. This also happened with a recent game that I played in the Dead Space remake, where they made Isaac Clarke a voiced character instead of what he was like in the original first game. I always got a sense as to the kind of person he was, especially when they explore his background as the type of person who did really bad things, given the fact that he was at a prominent event in human history known as Wooden Knee, where Native Americans were slaughtered by the United States Army. To this point as well, I will add, just from a general perspective of talking about the characters, I do love that this game establishes, like in the first two games, that there are really not many good people in this world. There are maybe just a few characters throughout all three games that you could say were a comrade or somebody who wanted to do good. Other than that though, every other character in this universe, especially in a game like BioShock Infinite, is in it for their own game politically, religiously, and also from the perspective of gaining power across so many others. When you look at the people who inhabit the city of Columbia, you definitely get a weird sensation when you first walk into it, but at the same time goes further on when you are exploring the city and you get to a point like the Raffles Square, for example, that is when it all changes for the worst. I myself kept constantly wondering as I was walking through around the city why there were no black people and other people of different races and ethnicities, and it was just constantly white people the entire time. And it dawned on me as I would hear the conversations of some of the people around me that there was probably a racist undertone aspect to the city. Turns out I was very right, considering once you get to Raffles Square and you see an interracial couple on stage about to be stoned by the character of Jeremiah Fink, your idea of what the city is about to instantly turn for the worst, and for me, I was ready to go crazy on all these racist assholes. It's aspects like this in the game that really cement the look and feel of a BioShock game from a character perspective. Again, there really are no good people here to root for, and so from there on out, you are already given an idea as to how you're supposed to feel. Other main characters like Cornelius Slate, Lady Comstock, Daisy Fitzroy, the leader of the revolutionary movement, and even the worst of them all, Zachary Hale Comstock, all have their mysteries behind them, which is something that I love when you are exploring the city, but they also have their tendencies to be really bad people at times. This game does not hit you over the head with every single detail behind their characters through exposition or otherwise, and again, this is what left me so shocked and surprised when we do get near the end of the game, and so many big reveals come your way that left my mouth open in awe. This is a perfect segue because now I do want to talk about that story, a story that might be one of the best stories I've ever come to experience in a video game. Again, I do want to talk spoilers here, so you have been warned again if you have not played the game. Again, I already mentioned one of the main points of the story, which is around you, Booker, rescuing Elizabeth and taking her away from Columbia, but inside of that, there is also a second main plot which involves you exploring the city of Columbia even more to unearth its secrets that would help you escape with her. Inside of this, there are many themes that are explored through the philosophical concept of American exceptionalism, which leads into ultra-nationalism, religious fanaticism, social Darwinism, flags, patriotic music, and propaganda posters are spread throughout every corner and promote the idea that Columbia is a haven from the so-called unwanted of the world. It is a fascinating through line in exploring messages, social commentary, and what have you that really leans into the central core of what the main characters are trying to see through and figure out with this city and its people. One of the bigger things that they lean on in that case is that in this universe, history was changed just based off the fact that America, from the looks of it, celebrated the death of Abraham Lincoln by really holding true the ideals of what John Wilkes Booth stood for in killing Lincoln, given the fact that there is such a racist nature to so many people in the city. For me, I'll admit it was a lot to consume at first, and given how the game makes you look on the characters, you do emphasize with what the game is trying to speak to. When trying to escape with Elizabeth, you are desperately trying to figure out how it connects to you, Booker, and how Elizabeth got tied into it all in the first place. I will again also admit that a lot of the stuff did fly over my head because I am not an insanely smart person to to understand everything that comes with something like religion, Darwinism, exceptionalism, and whatnot. For a lot of people who play this game for the first time, it could be a lot to take in, and too much at times, but I guess for me, it was just right enough that I could still be invested, especially when talking about the fact that the gameplay portion of the game is what really brought me in. The story is driven heavily by these kinds of characters, how they came about, and where their ties lead to the creation of a city like Columbia. Two of those big characters are the Lutece, twin relatives who are quantum physicists that unravel everything for you. There is such a massive psychological game played with them that you can never tell if they are the ones driving the narrative or if it's everything that's in your head. They are the ones who created the city and helped to build it up, but there was also a darker side to them around you, Booker, and Elizabeth with regards to the character Comstock. When I say I did not see any of these twists coming with regards to who these characters were and how it all connected with each other, it was just me in utter shock. And given the fact that Elizabeth's power, which allows her to rip tears into these universes, for you to see this twist is even more crazy and goes to show how well written the story was. I genuinely wish I could go back and become that first time player again and experience the story all over. This is how good it was. Again, there is something about this story that just feels so well detailed and taken care of that I could never have predicted the twist. I could never have predicted that Booker DeWitt and Zachary Comstock are the same person, the good guy and the villain at the same time. Like, how do you predict something like that? Given the fact that Elizabeth is your daughter as well, it just makes the story so insane to think about. And even the final thing that I want to speak to, which is the final couple of shots and sequences, they truly left me in disbelief with everything around this game and how it connected to Rapture City from the previous two BioShock games. I went into BioShock Infinite thinking that maybe this was a new storyline and maybe it had no connection to the past two. And man, when those last couple of sequences hit you and you realize it was all connected with each other, you are just losing your mind. That came out of nowhere and it hit me like a rock. To that point as well, I am really happy that this game has an ending that's definitive. It doesn't give you the multi-ending trope that the past two games did. It just tells you right then and there that this is how it all ends. I truly wish I knew what level of psychological warfare that the writers of this game had to go through in order to craft this entire story and also its DLC. That is again also another great segue into the next portion of this video essay, because I now want to talk about that DLC, The Burial at Sea. I had so many people recommend to me that I play this DLC before giving my full thoughts on the game, and I cannot thank those people enough. This is some of the best video game DLC I have ever experienced, no matter if it is a single player based game or a multiplayer based game. I've experienced all kinds of DLC in my time gaming, but this one is just levels above so much of what I've played, especially from a story perspective. A two-part episode story arc that explores Rapture City on the eve of the underwater city's fall from grace through the eyes of Booker DeWitt in the first episode and as Elizabeth in the second. The craziest thing about this DLC for me is that at points you try to conceive of the idea in your head that it's an alternate reality, but at the same time, deep down, you keep thinking to yourself that it is somehow connected to the original main game story. So ideally, you really are going in with a blank slate at your hands to understanding what is what and who is who, simply based off the fact that you cannot tell how everything is connected to this particular storyline, especially given it is taking place in Rapture City. Speaking to that point, one of, if not my biggest fear, is the ocean, at least the portion of it that comes from the idea of simply just being underwater and seeing nothing but blue. The portion of this DLC where you get sent down all the way below the city, even deeper to the Fontaine department store, is chilling and looks amazing. Anytime I was inside those buildings and I looked out the window, it just looked terrifying for me. On top of that, you had to deal with the fact that you had to fight against Fontaine himself and his followers while finding a girl named Sally, who is the key to the whole story. It was an interesting adventure for both parts of these two DLCs, and given how short they were, I felt like it did just enough for me to get a grasp on what the story was trying to give to you. Again, this particular story takes place in the final moments before the uprising began, where you see the war-torn Rapture in the first two BioShock games. This version of Booker, who we come to find out is actually Comstock, gets killed when you're searching for this girl, and then you end up playing as Elizabeth, which is an even bigger turn that I was not expecting. I found that her particular part of the DLC was a little slower and I wasn't as invested, but once the story started to pick up and we got to the very end with what happens between you and Fontaine, I again was losing my mind. Once those story details start to be revealed about what you found, how it pertained to Fontaine, and then how it's somehow connected in with the character of Jack from the first game, it is such a smartly written narrative to piece everything together. Elizabeth dies after all of this, which sucked, I'll admit, but I guess it made sense given how terrible of a person Fontaine was. I also really love how when you are sitting through in the credits in shock and awe, and you get that tiny post-credit scene of the tail end of the plane sinking to the ocean, which is of the plane that Jack was on, it was just a nice cherry on top to fully connect it all in from beginning to end. Again, I'll say it another time, but this DLC is absolutely fantastic. I was truly not expecting this game to go to the lengths that it did story-wise. Without a doubt, it is the best story out of all three games, and I know that's going to be a controversial opinion, but I'll definitely stand by it. But of course, we had to save the best for last, which is where I now talk about the gameplay of BioShock Infinite. The BioShock games are very well known for their very insane, chaotic, and just pure awesome gameplay and gameplay mechanics. Infinite adapts the gameplay formula of BioShock 1 and 2 with weapons, powers, and upgrades often functioning similar as those in the earlier games, albeit they're just named differently. For example, plasmids are now called Vigors. The player may carry only 2 weapons at a time instead of having an inventory of them, and can collect other weapons and ammunition from defeated enemies or the environment. So it's basically all the same, given a change with something like the guns, for example. At first I didn't really know how to feel about the whole only 2 guns thing, but once we get into the game and it went on, I started to adapt to it, and it got used to it, and when I came to realize how many different kinds of guns there were in the game, it made sense to me why they went down that route. The Vigors in this game might be the most fun versions of the power-ups you get out of any of the 3 games. There are 11 in this game, and all of them each have their own fun characteristic and personality to them. My favorite, honest to God, was probably Murder of Crows. It is a new take on the insect swarm, but with crows this time, and honestly, I found this to be maybe the most fun. I would just constantly dump all these crows on all my enemies without a care in the world. Shock Jockey was also my second most used, since it is just Electro Bolt, but in different name. These two combined for some awesome gameplay experiences that for me, I felt were way more interesting and way more explosive than the previous 2 games. There is weirdly no research aspect in this game with regards to your enemies, which never fazed me because I never once noticed or cared because I was so consumed by everything else going on. Another massively cool game mechanic is the Skyhook, which lets you ride along the rail lines, and that is a roller coaster ride I was not expecting to have so much fun with. It can be a little clunky to handle at times based on the controls, but for the most part it never gave me any issues. The audio logs in this game play the same role as they did in the past couple of games, and I did like the new addition of the kinetoscopes that you can watch in silent film in the depiction of Columbia propaganda and the story of the city throughout. There are just really cool world-building game mechanics like this that I like to see in video games. I, for one, was a massive fan of the money in this game as well. I like that it allowed you to be unlimited with how much you could carry instead of just stopping you at a certain amount like it did in the past 2 games. Granted, there is a bit of a slight problem with the system in the sense that when it comes to purchasing things from any of the mini vending machines throughout the city, you are really only inclined to purchase from a select few. The dollar bill vending machine, which is the one that's been carried throughout each of the 3 games, honestly became useless in this one simply because of the fact that everything you could purchase from it could just be looted heavily off enemies and the environments. The only thing you really need to purchase is from the Minuteman's armory for weapon upgrades, and then also the Vigor vending machine for power upgrades. Thankfully, I never had a looting problem where I was maxing myself out on everything, so there is a trade-off here in this game with some of the things that I like and didn't like as opposed to how they were handled in the first 2 games for these systems. The enemies in BioShock Infinite also left a very interesting element to the gameplay experience for me. The police, soldiers, and splicers from Burial at Sea are just your normal henchmen enemies. They brought back new and interesting looking security device type enemies that look the part of the time period, and then you have your heavy hitting enemies that I found to be very interesting in difficulty and in their looks and designs. Handymans and motorized patriots are basically the big daddies of this game and pack the most punch to kill. Again, really cool in design and offer great usage for loot to pick up as well as the minigun that the patriots use against you. You have other heavier enemies like firemen, zealot of the lady, beasts, and sirens that all have their own unique abilities and qualities that possess a challenge for you to beat. I particularly liked the Boy of Silence only because of the fact that it was an enemy that was limited to one part of the entire game. game. A part of the game, might I add, that was delving more into the horror roots of BioShock and its uneasiness of the world as it got darker. This type of character wears this weird-looking suit with a large helmet that can detect you via light coming from its mouth. Basically, it added a stealth element to that portion of the game that I really liked gameplay-wise. I also seem to not have mentioned it enough in this video, if at all, but the character of Songbird was very interesting. A giant flying mechanical pigeon that is meant to protect Elizabeth that leaves such an interesting mystery to it that honestly it was one of those characters that I wanted to learn about more. You do get a section of this in the game with regards to the story, but gameplay-wise, it is even bigger by the time you get to the end of the game. In the very last mission on Comstock's ship, you are able to control Songbird and use them to attack the Vox Populi, and it's amazing in every way. An ultra-powerful enemy like that was thankfully not a boss fight for me to fight against because it would definitely have kicked my ass every time. You also have another gameplay element in the use of Elizabeth's power with her tears. She can use that to summon things in the environment and battlefield when fighting enemies, and added such a new twist on the gameplay with regards to looting, picking up things, and gaining assistance from other things like motorized patriots or turrets for protection. With regards to the guns in the game, which I already alluded to earlier, because of the fact that there's no inventory system, you are never able to get used to each one and be familiar with it for the whole of the game. You are constantly switching back and forth between each new gun you get, and for me, I didn't mind this that much. You have your normal regular guns, and then you also have the Vox Populi versions, which are much more modified and have better qualities to them, like stability, damage, and reticles for the sights. I can't really pick for certain which one I had the most fun with because they all to me were just very fun to use in their own ways. The game also had another fun mode called Clash in the Clouds, a really cool round and wave-based mode that I think is something that could definitely bring me back to playing this game in the future if I wanted something to play in the game that's not the story. You were able to customize it through buying and purchasing weapons, vigors, and upgrades for them while going through each wave. After playing, you can go into the Museum of Swords and buy these cool collectibles to showcase your successes. Overall, gameplay-wise, I think it is the best of the series, and I'll be curious to know if anybody here agrees with me on that. Now that I've finished talking about the game itself, I do want to talk real quickly about potentially what comes in the future for this series, because if there was one game in this franchise that I would love to see be adapted into a movie, it is absolutely BioShock Infinite. We know for a fact that Netflix is adapting the first game into a film under the direction of Francis Lawrence, the director of some of the Hunger Games films, and the writer of the films like Blade Runner 2049 and Logan. I think that is a perfect pairing for a world like this. On top of that, we also have a confirmation of sorts, or I guess rumor in this case, within the last couple of years, that a BioShock 4 was being made set in the cold landscape of Antarctica via some plot details. I think that's a really dope idea for a fourth game, especially given Antarctica is not really explored in anything for entertainment a whole lot. I would definitely play a fourth game in the future if it were ever made, but I also would rather it start a new story. It just feels like Infinite kind of closed the loop on these first three games. In a final conclusion statement of sorts, to round out this video, BioShock Infinite has proven enough to me after playing through it all that it is without a doubt the best in the series for me. It is a masterful work of art that has such incredible levels of detail and passion to it that I love to see in video games and other forms of entertainment media. Between the masterful storytelling, atmosphere that is detailed to perfection, the characters and gameplay that all come along with it to only add to that note of perfection, I can definitely say with all that in mind that this game is in fact a masterpiece, and this series as a whole is probably one of the best video game trilogies ever made. With that in mind, I now want to close off this video by asking you all to please comment down below your thoughts on not just my commentary of BioShock Infinite, but on the whole series together with how Infinite ties everything together and how you've come to appreciate it all these years later. Where does BioShock Infinite rank for you amongst all three games? Comment all this down below as we can have a discussion about it. If you are new here to this channel, please be sure to subscribe if you are looking forward to any other games that I come to play for the first time in the future. It is time to look for my next series to begin, and I can't wait to bring any and all of you along for the journey. I hope everyone here has a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you soon for more to come. This is Orion, signing out.